So it's nice to see everyone. I have a little bit of a cough still, but I feel a whole lot better than I did last time. um, and so I feel a lot clearer too in my mind. So that's very helpful. Okay, so I think in the beginning, then maybe we'll just take 15 minutes to do like a breathing meditation, shamatha in Sanskrit, shane in Tibetan, calm abiding in English. So I'll just talk as if people don't know, so I won't assume that people know necessarily. But choose an object like the sensation of air passing in and out of your nostrils, or your belly rising and falling with your breath, or it could be just an image of the Buddha or the feeling of love itself. You can choose your object. And in this meditation, we'll just gently bring our focus on that object. And the point of the exercise is to refine our focus and attention on an object, the ability to notice when we're deviating from the object chosen, the ability to bring ourselves back onto the object, and the ability to modulate the um, experience of um, excitement or like agitation, or dullness or sinking. So these are all skills that we're essentially working on simultaneously. I will keep track of the time so you don't have to worry about it. And we'll just do this for 15 or so minutes in order to relax and focus the mind. And then with our minds sort of more relaxed, more focused, then we can adjust our motivation for listening to these, listening to this talk. We try and develop a motivation that includes as many living beings as possible. So I think all those beings have benefited me directly or indirectly. And I wish to repay their kindness. And to do that, I want to remove their suffering and contribute to their happiness. And so to do that, I need to develop myself fully. So I can be of the most benefit possible. And so in order to do that, I'm going to study the teachings of the Buddha as taught through the Gelug school of Lama Tsongkhapa, as taught through FPMT, Lama Yeshe, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche there, the way they explained Lama Tsongkhapa's teachings to their students. Okay, and then we'll begin. So if Shayla, if you'd put up the foundation of all good qualities, the foundation of all good qualities. So this poem's, poem's not right, the prayer, it could be a poem too. So this prayer is written in sometime in the 1400s, I don't know exactly when, by Lama Tsongkhapa. And Lama Tsongkhapa is the founder of the type of Tibetan Buddhism that that this organization, Thupten Norbuling, FPMT Center, the organization, teaches. And I thought I'd read through it, and that will serve as a basis for what I wanted to touch on today. So I'll read, but you can read along with me. The foundation of all good qualities is the kind and perfect pure guru. Correct devotion to him or her is the root of the path. By clearly seeing this and applying great effort, please bless me to rely upon him or her with great respect. Understanding that the precious freedom of this rebirth is found only once is greatly meaningful and is difficult to find again. Please bless me to generate the mind that unceasingly day and night takes its essence. This life is as impermanent as a water bubble. Remember how quickly it decays and death comes. After death, just as a shadow follows the body, the results of black and white karma follow. Finding firm and definite conviction in this, please bless me always to be careful to abandon even the slightest negative action and accomplish all virtuous deeds. Seeking samsaric pleasures is the door to all suffering. They are uncertain and cannot be relied upon. Recognizing these shortcomings, please bless me to generate the strong wish for the bliss of liberation. Led by this pure thought, mindfulness, alertness, and great caution arise. The root of the teachings is keeping the pratimoksha vows. Please bless me to accomplish this essential practice. Just as I have fallen into the sea of samsara, so have all mother transmigratory beings. Please bless me to see this, train in supreme bodhichitta, and bear the responsibility of freeing transmigratory beings. Even if I develop only bodhicitta, but I don't practice the 3 types of morality, I will not achieve enlightenment. With my clear recognition of this, please bless me to practice the bodhisattva vows with great energy. Once I've pacified distractions to wrong objects and correctly analyzed the meaning of reality, please bless me to generate quickly within my mind stream the unified path of calm abiding and special insight. Having become a pure vessel by training in the general path, please bless me to enter the holy gateway of the fortunate ones, the supreme Vajra vehicle. At that time, the basis of accomplishing the 2 attainments is keeping pure vows and samaya. As I have become firmly convinced of this, please bless me to protect my vows and pledges like my life. Then, having realized the importance of the 2 stages, the essence of the Vajrayana, by practicing with a great energy, never giving up the 4 sessions, please bless me to realize the teachings of the Holy Guru. Like that, may the gurus who show the noble path and the spiritual friends who practice it have long lives. Please bless me to pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. In all my lives, never separated from perfect gurus, may I enjoy the magnificent Dharma. By completing the qualities and stages of the paths, may I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara. So I'll put the poem in context, but I'll start at the beginning. So in the myth of the Buddha is a prince, and it's foretold that he'll either become a great king or he'll become a great spiritual seeker. His father wants them to take after him, to follow in his footsteps. So he protects the Buddha from the sufferings of life. And over time, the Buddha grows up experiencing a life sort of free from gross suffering, from obvious suffering. But eventually it comes across the 4 sights: sickness, old age, and death. Those are the first 3 sights that kind of represent the suffering that awaits us all. And the 4th sight, a wandering spiritual seeker, that represents the ability to transcend those sufferings. When he sees the 4th sight, he decides to leave his kingdom, including his family, and wanders around looking for spiritual teachings. He meets there's no such thing as Buddhism, so he meets non-Buddhist teachers and learns to focus his mind, and then with that focus later begins to reflect on the nature of suffering and its transcendence, and and then just to skip over the whole story, eventually becomes enlightened and begins to teach. And then according to the mythology, it's taught that he teaches until he's 80 years old, and then he passes into parinirvana. So it means he died, but that he's liberated, or he's transcended ordinary suffering, and then his body, it dies, and so it's sort of finally released. So over for let's just say it's 40 something years, the Buddha is said to teach. That collection of teachings is passed down orally, and then eventually, maybe centuries later, put into writing. And so then we develop a collection of teachings, and future Buddhist practitioners begin to try and organize them. And so we have the teachings, the oldest writings are part of the Pali Canon. The newest, relatively speaking, writings are part of the Sanskrit canon. And they touch on lots of things: how to live as a monk and nun, how to live in a monastic community, teachings for lay people, how do you save money, how much should you save, how much should you give to the ordained monks and nuns. Then teachings on meditation, how to develop it, teachings on insight, how to transcend suffering. What is samsara? What are the Four Noble Truths, for example, as a collection of teachings? So you have lots and lots of teachings. And over time, they get codified and they get organized. Fast forward to Lama Atisha in the 11th century. So those teachings are still being taught in India. There's the newer teachings, the older teachings. Debates happen. There's lots of commentaries now by Indian masters in particular. And there's just a lot. There's a lot of texts. So eventually Lama Atisha is invited to Tibet in order to spread the teachings of Buddha there. And he spends his final days there. And he composes a prayer, a set of teachings for his Tibetan students, and that's Lampa on the Path to Enlightenment. And it organizes the teachings from beginning to end. That it is argued from beginning to end, and it touches on all the major points that are needed in order to attain enlightenment. So it takes a big collection of texts and then puts them in an order in order to digest. From Lama Atisha, we get the organizing principle of the scopes. So the lower scope, the medium scope, and the great scope. And these are ways of categorizing one's approach to spiritual teachings. So in very quick summary, a non-spiritual person, someone who is not Buddhist, is someone who does not believe in, or is not even open to, does not believe or is not open to continuity of consciousness, and is thus not open to the idea of past and future lives, and is thus not open idea that moral actions, volitional actions, make an impact on the quality of your future existence, and thus doesn't do anything, doesn't feel particularly inclined to act from that moral position, and thus is not a spiritual person. because a non-spiritual person from the Buddhist perspective is a person who's concerned only with the pleasures of this life and is deeply focused on extracting as much pleasure and avoiding as much pain from the current life as possible. So that's considered a non-spiritual person. So a spiritual person on the lower scope, the first scope, is someone who's more concerned about the quality of their future lives than their present life. So one way of saying this is that they're a person who's concerned about investing in the person that will come before them, meaning future lives. Future lives is posited on a continuity of consciousness. In Buddhism, you have 3 levels of consciousness. You have gross, subtle, and extremely subtle. reincarnation is posited on the extremely subtle mind, but we use the gross mind, our direct experience of the gross mind, to make certain observations or presumptions, or maybe even assumptions if you're being more critical of what that means. So using the gross mind, we observe its continuity. So we're so from our direct experience, we can go, I'm having a conscious experience, I'm a thinking being. That's proved only by one's direct experience of experience. So I know I'm thinking because I know I'm thinking. And then if we go back a step, back a thought, well, we go, yeah, there was a thought before that thought, and there was a thought before that thought, and there was a thought before that thought, and there's a thought before. This is gross mind, just the consciousness that we're presently experiencing. And we don't know directly there will be a future thought. We assume a future thought will come. It's our experience that a future thought does come. And so we generally rely on a sense that that there's a continuity going forward. And based on our experience of our past, we kind of project a past experience, a continuity going back. So for Buddhists, their understanding of the mind is, it is that part of us, it is that part of what constitutes our personhood, that is an experience of awareness, that it knows, that which knows, and then that which is clear in the sense that it reflects its objects. So things can appear in our conscious experience. Good things can appear, bad things, neutral things can appear. And it's clear in the sense that it's fundamentally undisturbed, that our nature is sort of pure or undefiled or whatever, but we could talk about that more later. The mind is, so from a Buddhist perspective, based off of their experience of themselves and how they extrapolate, then they argue that the mind is beginningless, that you have this continuity of experience and you just trace it back, trace it back, trace it back, trace it back, trace it back. And so at what point do you say there's a first mental moment, a mental experience? Now, certain worldviews would debate with that, which is completely fine. But from a Buddhist perspective, that's very difficult. That you have a continuity of conscious experience, and then you posit that there's nothingness behind one of them, and that something appears out of nothingness. That's hard for a Buddhist philosopher to understand. And so their argument is that, oh, there must not be a beginning. It must stretch back continuously. So from the Buddhist worldview, one aspect of mind that's important to have is its beginninglessness. If it's beginninglessness, then you can assert it sort of has an endlessness, that the continuity continues forward. Why would it suddenly turn into nothing? That's hard from a Buddhist point of view.
Michael, Jay has risen.
Oh, hi. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Michael.
Yeah.
When you just described the mind, and I know this is a difficult question, but
Sure.
for me, I immediately, and I'm influenced by more of a Vedantic approach. How is that different from what's the self?
Yeah.
Because I always find this very befuddling.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Well, okay, I don't know that much about Vedanta, so I won't be able to comment on that. But in Buddhism, in its most, I'm being very general, and I'm glossing over a lot. So just it's a very simple answer. That's not actually that simple. So I just want to disclaim my answer. So from a Buddhist perspective, generally speaking, a human, for example, because it helps to constrain the context. A human is a being whose personhood is 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 in one sense, from one perspective, it is a label and a projection on the psychophysical aggregates. So there's so from Buddhist perspective, a person has a body and a mind. They have their physical embodiment, which could be gross, subtle, and extremely subtle. And then they have a physical, or then they have a psychological component, which can be gross, subtle, and extremely subtle. And those work in tandem, or they sort of work together. And a person is sort of the label, if you will, or the projection on those two continuities. And so unlike a Christian concept of a soul, you don't have an unchanging, independent self other than the continuity of the aggregates. So I don't know if Vedanta more aligns with a soul, like a Christian perspective of a soul. What do you think?
From my point of view, when I realized I could have used the word soul to grab the concept of what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, because I have looked into this question and I have heard this description several times, several different ways. And I just find it very befuddling. I don't identify with it. I mean, it's just my issue, but I don't get it. I really don't get it.
You don't get the distinction, or you don't get, you like the Vedanta one more, or?
I feel like I have a self. I have an eternal entity that goes on. You know, I can certainly grasp the concept versus the Christian soul that, I wasn't created, right? And there is a continuity, perhaps, it gets fuzzy, but okay, so I've always been, oh dear, I've always been here and always will be here in some manifestation.
Sure.
But when we talk about aggregates and all of that stuff, I get really very fuzzy-headed.
Thanks for bringing it up. From Buddhists would say that the Buddhists would say your physical continuity will cease at death, and your atoms and all that kind of stuff will be kind of recycled into how the universe works. But they also assert that the psycho part, from the mind aggregates, has its own continuity that can't be destroyed, although it's changing. And so in a way, it's like you can say there's one Colorado River, but then the river is always flowing. So it's both there and not there. I'm being very poetic in some ways. So they'd say, okay, yes, your psychological aggregates, that which is mind, will continue infinitely. They believe that, but that its qualities and characteristics are always subject to change, because it's an impermanent phenomena. It's something that arises out of causes and conditions. And so the way you kind of give proof for it but I put that very loosely in quotes, is just looking at the nature of one's experience. So I'm happy in the morning, and I'm depressed in the afternoon, and I'm joyful in the evening, and so the quality of the mind, if this is sort of happiness and this is sort of sadness, it might go like that, but that this continuity of consciousness maintains indefinitely. And so the Buddhist project is to not to stop or sort of manipulate the continuity itself, but it's to change the quality so that the quality of the mind is always quote unquote pure, or is basically happy and free from suffering. And so in that sense, there's an eternal quality that could kind of feel like a soul, but in, at least in Christian interpretations of the soul as I know them, there's more of this sense of this unchanging, fixed, created by God, and then they start to diverge pretty strongly. But what's helpful, so we have to look into that more. But what's helpful about bringing that up in the context of this course is, from a Buddhist perspective, it's that misapprehension of the self that's fundamentally problematic, and is, depending on the type of Buddhism you're studying, is the source of suffering, ordinary suffering itself. So it is such an important question to understand what the self is eventually, because that understanding the self is the process by which one transcends suffering, according to Buddhism. The misapprehension of the self is the fundamental problem. So then the question is, how do we begin to do that? And then that's why Lama Atisha and Lama Tsongkhapa become important, because they're offering a step-by-step structure in order to address that misapprehension of the self, what they see as a misapprehension of the self. And so it's very important. So thank you. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, or if that just brings up more doubts, or what do you think, Jay?
Oh, sorry. I don't know.
That's
how I was on
okay.
mute.
No.
It helps sort out my kind of fuzzy ideas about this.
Okay.
Situation.
Yeah.
So I can see that as we travel on, that that there are changes that occur in what I would label self, but within the mind, and God, I must have a kind of a Christian loyalty way back.
Yeah.
Because gosh golly, we were certainly urged to be good people and to make changes, and that the soul was, so there was a future for the soul. Of course, I guess once you died, that was kind of ka-chunk it, in terms of change. But yeah, now it's fascinating that these different concepts of who we really are can be so different.
Yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely.
So it's a question that I can kind of think, like when I was 6 years old, that was sort of like, who the heck am I and what's going on out here? And that question still is so vibrant. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. There's a lot more to the answer, but so don't give up yet, because my kind of muddled, fuzzy answer is barely scratching the surface of how Gelug's in particular see the self, and it's an important question. So Lama so Buddha, he's enlightened, he's teaching, codified. So then we have the scopes. So so mm, so the concept of scopes comes from Lama Atisha. We can read it later in his work, Lamp on the Path of Enlightenment. That same structure to the entire to the path of Dharma, to the Buddhist path, is maintained by Lama Tsongkhapa, who later expands on it even more in Lamrim Chenmo, middling Lamrim, short Lamrim, and then there's various Lamrim prayers. Foundation of all good qualities is one of those short, very short Lamrim prayers that contains all that structure in it, but without the depth that you'll find in Lamrim Chenmo and other commentaries. So this course is about Lamrim Chenmo. So Lamrim, Lam is path, Rim is graduated stages. So graduated stages of the path to enlightenment. So again, it's already in the name that you follow this step by step. And so what's the ultimate goal? In Tibetan Buddhism, the Lam Rim precedes the teachings on Tantra. And so that's important to this tradition to understand that the Lamrim is all in preparation for Tantra. And Tantra is a system of meditation where in summary you sort of manipulate your subtle energies in the body, which by their nature manipulates the subtle minds, and you're able to see the nature of the self accurately. And and I'm skipping over some other stuff. That those are considered the highest teachings for the Gelug school, the teachings on Tantra, and Lamrim's all in preparation. So what are you doing in Lamrim? You're essentially changing your mind, you're changing your worldview, you're sort of modifying your motivation, because they argue that you need that new worldview, you need those kind of new motivations in order to successfully practice Tantra, which is what is required in order to become enlightened from their perspective. So let's begin looking at the kinds of worldview and the kinds of motivations that we'll need to have so that the rest of the Buddhist project or experience, so that it makes more sense. So in the beginning we saw in Lama Tsongkhapa's prayer that you see in Lama Atisha as well, that the first step is to find a teacher. So actually, let me back up. I want to go back to mind, because I think that's where I left. So there's a beginningless quality to mind. That's part of the Buddhist worldview. Part of the worldview is that the mind is yours. So what you do with your mind affects you, but it doesn't affect me. There's sort of like a personal possession to mind, in a sense. And the mind has great potential. Well, one, it's not fixed. That's another quality of mind. So that if you're sad, you're not permanently sad. Or if you're sort of having pleasure, you're sort of not permanently in pleasure either. That's an important quality, this non-fixed state. And by extension, if you have this non-fixed state, then you have a lot of potential. And so that's part of the Buddhist worldview, that the mind's potential is great. You become a very generous person. You become a very ethical person. You become a very patient person, a very focused person, a very, not ambitious, but someone who doesn't give up, wise person, all these qualities. That's also part of the Buddhist worldview, that you can develop these to a limit that we're not used to experiencing in the ordinary world. So how do we prove that ourselves, that we have this potential? So we think, well, once I had a hard time, giving $1 to someone in the streets. And then I practiced until it was very easy. And then I wanted to give 2, and I practiced, and now I can give 20 or something like that. It's finding evidence in your own life that you had a very small skill, like generosity or ethics or patience, and that you could see it developing as time passed and as you put effort into it. Extrapolate that by a lot, and then we have a kind of felt sense of, oh, I could have a perfect kind of generosity. I could have the kind of generosity that's written about in some of the Mahayana sutras. So a famous Mahayana sutra is the Golden Light Sutra. In the Golden Light Sutra is a chapter about the tigress who feeds her body, who's starving and wants to feed her cubs. And then the Buddha, as a bodhisattva, so the Buddha before he's a Buddha, is a prince, and he kills himself on a piece of bamboo and feeds the tigress because he has so much compassion for the tigress and the cubs. So that's an ideal. That's part of the myth. That's part of the sutras. So yeah, I could develop that one day. I'm not telling anyone to do that right now, but I could do that. I could experience so much compassion and love that I would be willing to give up my life to benefit a being as an ideal. So this is just about the minds that you can change. You can give up bad habits, you can adopt good ones, you can become a Buddha. That's the point of Buddhism, is to become a Buddha, or to approach that ideal, phrased another way. Okay, so how do we do that? So through cause and effect, through causes and conditions, we come across the Dharma, we come across a teacher of Buddhism, and it's recommended that in order to transverse to practice Buddhism completely, to practice the Dharma completely, then you need a qualified teacher. You need a teacher who really knows their stuff, and who has accomplished, ideally, who has accomplished the kinds of the kinds of feats or the kinds of qualities that you want to have yourself. Lama Tsongkhapa, even in the 14th century, or not 14th century, in the 1400s, said, if it requires a teacher to learn an ordinary skill like baking or carpentry or what have you, then all the more reason why you would need a teacher to do something that's so complex and so long and so important. I think that makes a degree of sense. And so then he goes on to say, so you need to find a good teacher with all these qualities. And then he enumerates these qualities that are taken out of other sutras. And the qualities are, having good ethics, having good, being patient, loving the student more than the teacher loves themselves, understanding, having some meditative experience, having some wisdom experience, these kinds of things. I'm just glossing over. And so when you found a teacher that has those qualities, then the general recommendation is to check the teacher, check their students, check the people your teacher hangs out with, their peers, to make sure that before you get into a relationship with them, a teacher-student relationship with them, that you found someone that you can trust, who's not going to lead you astray, who's not going to abuse power, and so forth. And so the reason is because Because once you do need a teacher in order to learn about Buddhism, to learn how to practice the Dharma, how to progress. And it's such an important and fragile process. And if your teacher, does something to shock you, then the danger is that you can lose all of Dharma because of this teacher. And so it's very important to be very clear about what your relationship is with your teacher up front, so that you can avoid, the pain of losing the Dharma completely in the future because of some error on the teacher or the student side, or both. So you check up, you make sure that they're qualified, that they're a good resource, that you feel comfortable, and these kinds of things. Once you found a teacher that you can trust, after could be years and years of assessing them, then you devote yourself to them. So you get the phrase guru devotion occurs in Tibetan Buddhism a lot. And you devote them in two ways, thought and action. When you devote in thought, then that's, maybe I'll reverse it, in action and thought. So when you devote in action, then these are things like you make offerings to your teachers, and you give them service if they need it. And more importantly, you follow their teachings, which is the most important display of devotion through action. These kinds of actions you'll see throughout Asia. You'll see them in the West too. It's just we don't phrase them the same way. But students are giving their teachers, fruit, sometimes money, and or they help publish the teachers' writings, or drive them to a meeting, or that's a service. And then of course, the teachers tries to give instructions, and then ideally the student is practicing those instructions. So, okay, I'm going to meditate like this. They told me I should, make water bowl offerings in this sort of way, so I'm going to do it. That kind of thing. You do that because the teacher represents something. So functionally, they're giving you knowledge, and from a symbolic point of view, they are representing the Buddha in front of you. They are performing the function of the Buddha. If you were alive at the time of the historic Buddha and you were interested in his teachings, you would go and sit and listen. Well, that's not so, obviously that's not easy for us to do because of the gap in time, right? So the teacher serves that function to the best of their ability. And so devotion and thought is seeing the best in the teacher's qualities, seeing them as a Buddha, because you benefit from that dynamic, that relational dynamic. Even if they don't have the qualities, the mystical or mythical qualities of a Buddha, if they're just an ordinary person, at least you get the benefit of having related to this ideal. And that's Lama Tsongkhapa's position, which doesn't mean you have to do everything they say. You still have to maintain your own wisdom, your own ability to discern between right and wrong. You don't have to give up too much. And so I just have to make that very clear. It's both discerning, what's right and wrong, and also surrendering enough to change as a person. Because if you're fighting against the teacher all the time, you're like, that's not how you do it. That's not the way you do it. You don't know what you're talking about. The danger is you'll never change or learn because you'll have never absorbed what they do know. And at the same time, knowing like, that's a little too crazy, or that's a little too much for me, or that's not even ethical. So I'm not going to go down that road. And so we as students have to learn to do that. So that's the very first, there's more to say about how to relate to a teacher, but that's in general, that's what's necessary at the beginning, is that you have a teacher. Okay, let's say you have a teacher. The next kind of point is to reflect on the preciousness of your life as you have it now. So the phrase we use is to meditate or to think about precious human rebirth, what it means to be a human. And so something that's precious is something that is both rare and something that is valuable. And so if you're getting full commentary on the precious human rebirth teachings, you get teaching stories that talk about how rare it is. So one kind of beautiful and perhaps scary story, depending on how literally you take it, is that the Buddha in a sutra is said to have scratched the earth with his finger and said, the amount of human beings, or the amount of beings that are non-human, that are suffering in different realms, like animal realms and God realms and hell realms, and according to Buddhist cosmology, is like the earth itself, like the globe, like the planet Earth. That's the number. And the number of beings who have achieved a precious human rebirth are like the number of particles of dust under my fingernail. So there's a rarity, and there's other stories too about the rarity. That's a nice story. And then there's also preciousness. So why, from a Buddhist worldview, is a human rebirth a precious, why is it precious? Now, not all human births are necessarily, we can see the difference between them, can't we? I mean, the difference between someone without a house in the street versus the richest person on the planet. We can see obvious differences between them. But from the Buddhist worldview, the difference, the relative suffering of a human versus an animal, for example, is so great that humans kind of fall into a class of their own. And what humans have is a certain degree of freedom for very intense levels of suffering. And they experience enough there's sort of a perfect balance between pleasure and pain that allows them to reflect on the nature of reality, on like moral principles, that other beings in the Buddhist cosmology are suffering too much to be able to focus on. So if you think of this, like humans have a kind of intelligence, animals is the most convenient. So if you compare the intelligence of a human to an animal, you know, humans can rationalize in a special way, they can communicate in a special way, they are able to meditate in a way that maybe we don't find. They are able to create a balance between pleasure and pain so that they're not mired in suffering, but they're also not distracted by intense levels of pleasure. And so the point of precious human rebirth, meditating on precious human rebirth, is to encourage us, really, and to say, like, I've got something here. I have a human intelligence. My body is more or less working. You know, we're all getting older. My mind is more or less working. You know, we're all getting older. And I have encountered the Dharma. I have a natural interest. I've met someone who can sort of articulate something about it. I could certainly find books from much more educated teachers if need be. I'm not in a country that's where Buddhism is banned or forbidden, like if you think of maybe North Korea or something like that. There are monks and nuns that exist on the planet that dedicate their lives to the teachings, embody a sort of dedication that's very important to the continuity of Dharma on the planet. The Buddha taught, according to the myths and stories, that Buddha, achieved enlightenment on this earth and taught for 40 something years. Anyway, there's sort of counting your blessings as a spiritual person. So I'm interested in spirituality. Well, how am I doing? And the argument is that you're doing pretty well. And so that hopefully that invigorates you to continue on the rest of the path. And the rest of the path is hard and painful, as I'm going to get to very soon. But it's hard to get through. It's easier to get through the more difficult, painful aspects of Dharma when you can rely on the previous knowledge that you've gained. And so you can start to see this graduated steps, right? You have a teacher that can support you through the ups and downs of life and trying to pursue truth and trying to pursue spiritual progress. So your teacher is so important, right? And then precious human rebirth, sometimes we get very, when I start talking about death, which I'm going to, it can get big downer. And how do we refresh our minds? How do we balance our minds that we can rely on these precious human rebirth teachings and be like, I'm doing pretty good. I've got a lot to learn. I'm not where I want to be, but things are okay. So you need that step. So then after that, we get to the teachings on death and impermanence. And now we're in the lower scope. And now we're talking about what is the kind of worldview that needs to be developed and maintained in order to eventually practice the entire Buddhist path. Now, in some ways, I'm being a little deceptive when I say worldview, because it sort of seems like it's something you can kind of pick up and put down, like a scarf or something like that. From the Buddhist perspective, the Buddha is not just describing an option for you, although that is one way to perceive it. The Buddha, from the Buddhist perspective, is describing the way the world is. And so that's just an interesting take on it. He's saying that we misperceive the world, we misperceive ourselves, like we talked about earlier, and that misperception creates our suffering. So what's the first thing that we can address? The first topic to address. The first topic to address is death and impermanence. So the Buddha says that all things that arise upon causes and conditions are in the nature of impermanence, which is to say that the self, that external phenomena, are not only changing in gross ways, in obvious ways. I'm getting older. My beard is getting grayer. My hairline is shifting. These are gross changes. We can all accept those. We not accept them in the sense of liking them. We can accept that they exist because we observe them in ourselves. I was once a baby. I've seen photos. I was an adolescent. I was a young adult. I was an adult, and so on and so forth. Gross change. Impermanence, gross level impermanence. Then subtle level of permanence, the idea that objects that arise upon causes and conditions are changing moment to moment without ceasing. So it's not that I'm suddenly a kid, and then I'm suddenly an adolescent, and then I'm suddenly a young adult, and then I'm suddenly a middle-aged adult, that they happen in these kind of discrete units, but that there's sort of a continuity to how this process is going, and that it must be a constant change that's happening continuously. So why is that important? So that's important because the concept of ourselves in particular is that we sort of we can see those gross changes, but internally we don't have, because we can't see those moment to moment changes, we don't have an internal experience of constantly being in flux, constantly be in motion. And from the perspective of a human life, to be in constant flux, to be in constant motion, is to say we are constantly aging, or we're constantly dying. We're constantly in a process of decay. From the moment we're conceived, we can argue that we're dying. But most people don't necessarily believe, and additionally, they don't act from that understanding. So, so let me present from a different perspective. So let's imagine that we're trying to practice the lamrim. So in a formal sense, you would clean up your altar room, you'd make your offerings, you sit on a cushion, maybe you would kind of relax your mind or develop some concentration. And then you might say, oh, I want to meditate on the lamrim. So what does that mean? So it means you choose some topic of the lamrim that you're working on. We could say we're reflecting on death and impermanence. Okay, so then what does meditating on mean? It just means thinking about it. We think about it thoroughly based off of traditional teachings, based off of contemporary teachings. We base it off of our experience until we reach some sort of conclusion. Then we can perhaps sit with that conclusion as if we were kind of watching our breath, and kind of start to integrate that conclusion into our minds and see how that impacts the way we live. So let me give you some traditional, if you haven't already received them, some traditional teachings on death. So the first, this is like 9 points, meditation points on death. I may not get them perfectly, but you can look them up. I'll just tell you what I know off the top of my head. So we take the first sort of collection of points, and the first point is death is certain. Death is certain. So how do we prove that to ourselves? So one idea is death is certain. There's been no person on the planet who hasn't died. Not even the Buddha, who's said to have understood reality completely and fully. mm, I don't know how convincing that argument is. We don't have proof of anyone having lived forever. We could say that. We only have examples of people dying. Maybe that's another way to phrase that. Each moment is death is definite, life can be extended. That's good. I just got crib notes. Life cannot be extended. Yeah, death is definite. There's each moment of our life is heading towards death. You only have a certain amount of heartbeats, or there's only a certain number of seconds. There's no medicine or mantra or anything. Let me look up my book too, my crib notes, that can extend life. We can take medicine, obviously, and exercise and extend our life in that way, but there's nothing that can stop death in its tracks yet. Although I'm sure many people are working on it. Everyone has to die. There's very little time to practice Dharma. So this is sort of a third point in this collection of points that is very Buddhist context specific. The way they phrase it is there's very little time to practice Dharma. It just means that time's running out. So if you want to be a spiritual practitioner, now's your time. And this leads to a conclusion. Death is certain. So I want to practice Dharma. I want to practice Dharma. Yeah, we must practice Dharma is a conclusion. I want a tighter way of explaining that. Anyway, let's maybe take it from a non-Buddhist perspective, and you just take it from a secular perspective. It's clear you're going to die. We base this on the fact that every person that's ever come before us has died. We do not have the technology or means to extend life permanently. The chances of it happening in our lifetime are probably not that great, although there's some people that believe that that's possible. So at least in this very moment, you and me, online to online, face to face, at this very moment, it's certain that you will die. And so what do you want to do with that time? From the Buddhist perspective, there's already a built-in answer. It's practice the Dharma. Practicing the Dharma is the built-in answer because it's the way the Buddhist worldview says, I want to be free from suffering, and I want to have every kind of happiness. I want to be free from every kind of suffering. I want to have every kind of happiness. From the Buddhist perspective, that is just a given. That is a philosophical given. It's just the nature of what it is to be a being, a thinking being. Is to be a thinking being is in part to be an ordinary thinking being. I should be more specific. To be an ordinary thinking being is to say, I want to be free from suffering and I want to be happy. What that means for everyone might shift, but that general thrust is there. We see this. I think this is we see this in animals, for example. We see them run away to preserve their lives. We see they're not taught to necessarily run for their lives, or it's just an innate quality, preservation of life. So it's from secular perspective, right? Yeah. Anyway, so with this built-in answer, so we must practice Dharma. Then the second collection of points is the time of death is uncertain. So how do we convince ourselves? So let me read through the traditional ones so I don't make a mistake. The lifespan of a human is not fixed. there are many causes of death, and the body is extremely fragile. So when it says the lifespan of a human being is not fixed, they're talking about, from the Buddhist worldview, their cosmology has beings that have fixed lifespans, and they have beings that have unfixed lifespans. Humans are one of them that have unfixed lifespans. Other beings, like in the Buddhist cosmology, like God realms and stuff, they have fixed. From a secular point of view, that's not going to be that convincing of an argument. But from a Buddhist point of view, it's very convincing, because they're like, look, the sutra says, that's the proof, is that this text says that we don't have a fixed lifespan. The next point is that there's many causes of death. So this one we can all agree, Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike. Everywhere dangers loom. Even the things that we consider to protect us can destroy us. So we think our house is protecting us unless there's an earthquake and it destroys us. We think that a medicine protects us until the dose is wrong, or we have an allergic reaction to it. We think that food protects us until it's contaminated, or we have too much of it, or the allergy one's good too, or we're allergic to it. We think our family is going to protect us until one of them loses their mental stability and harms us. And this is just to show it's everywhere. The cars contribute to our lifespan, of course, obviously. I mean, they make commerce easier, and we can get to places faster. They're also, car accidents kill thousands and thousands and thousands of people a year, right? So we're not safe. That's what that point means. And then our body is fragile. It just talks about, it feels so secure and safe when we're comfortable, and then you get one tiny little virus or something like I had, or and you could be gone. And so even your body will betray you. For a lot of people, cancer and that things, your bodies will betray you. You can't even rely on your body, which is your most prized possession that we put in all this effort into protecting and preserving, and even it, can't be relied on. And going back to this fixed thing, to expand on the first point, this idea that there's no fixed lifespans. So from a sutra perspective, sometimes that's used as proof. Another kind of proof that might be more digestible for us is the idea that we can't sort of predict when any particular individual will die based on any particular characteristic, right? So I'm in my late 30s. People would assume that I'll be alive next week. But young people in their late 30s die all the time. They die before lots of people older than them. They die before lots of people younger than them. There are human beings that are very young that die before lots of people. I could be sick. I could be very deathly sick, and still I'll die after many other people have died who just got into a car accident, for example. So someone in the peak of their health could be walking, and I could be walking along, minding their own business, and I could be a hospital, dying of respiratory failure or kidney failure. And the person who's walking could still die before me. They could get hit or whatever happens. So we have a sense where we kind of have an unexamined sense that we know, okay, that person with a drug addiction problem, they're going to die before me. And that person who's jumping out of a plane is going to die before I am. And that person who's in their 70s is going to die before I am. Or that person in their 90s is definitely going to die before I am. And we kind of, when it's unexamined, I'll just speak for myself. I kind of have that sense of things. until I examine it and go, you know what, that's actually not proof of anything. I think I'm not gonna, I think, for example, I'm not gonna die before someone who's in Ukraine in a war zone. But I don't know that to be true, actually true. So that's another part of that element. And so once the conclusion is, so time is uncertain, so the conclusion is, well, I should practice Dharma now. So we take the conclusion of the first set of points and then the second set of points. The first set, the conclusion is we should practice Dharma, I should practice Dharma. And then the second set of points is I should practice Dharma now because I don't know. So if I believe doing this meditation will help me, or this prayer, or making this artwork, or just helping someone out, or giving them money, or helping an animal, or there's I understand we're all different, so I appreciate people that are I'm very hesitant when I act on things, but there's no time. When we examine life, we can see there's no time. There's no reason, there's no good reason to, it's not wise to hesitate, because it cannot guarantee, forget tomorrow, I can't guarantee the next minute. I could have an aneurysm in a minute. People have aneurysms, right? So this isn't to scare anyone, but it's to motivate them. Which leads us to our third set of points on death, is what matters at the time of death. So your physical objects won't help you. Let me read the traditional one. The physical objects, possessions and enjoyments can't help you. Friends and relatives can't help you. Your body can't help you. So this seems pretty clear. At death, all these things we've accumulated, put all this time into, houses, clothes, jobs, maybe we could say, investments, retirement accounts, heirlooms, fun experiences, memories, vacations, and things. Well, at the time of death, that all vanishes from the Buddhist worldview, because they're enjoyed independence on the body, and the body dissolves, decays. Those things are left behind. They're fought over by our families. We can create lots of misery with our left behind wealth. I don't know, that's beside the point, but so it's interesting. Then we think of friends and families and relationships. We're like, okay, I can accept that, my car won't matter, but what about my friends and family? Well, the Buddhist perspective is like, well, they can't come with you either. There's some cultures, I don't know about modern cultures, but ancient cultures where, they might kill your wives and your servants or something and put them in the same tomb as you, and because there's a belief they could go with you. But the Buddhist worldview is not like that, where you can take anyone with you. You don't know, from the Buddhist worldview, you don't know where you'll end up next, what body you'll end up next, what country, what experience you'll have. Will you recognize each other? Again, all from the Buddhist worldview. Will you recognize each other? Will you even like each other anymore? So it's all very fragile. And so we put all this effort into relationships and friendships, and we try to be liked and popular, and when you die, it's not going with you. Which isn't to say that we shouldn't be nice to people, but we have different points of philosophy that convinces why we should be nice to people. It's about putting that effort. So celebrity, for example, a life where being known and being appreciated is part of how you make your livelihood. Well, that's all that effort, and you don't get those fans. You have to make them again. From a Buddhist worldview, you have to make all those fans over again. So, and then they mention the body. They mention the body again. So they talk about how all the effort we put in our body. So we try and stay strong, and we try and look good, and we adorn ourselves, and we're worried about disease all the time, and you know, what difference does it make? They're arguing. I mean, why put in so much effort into your body if in a minute it can be gone? Now, that's not to discourage people from exercising, going to doctors and dentists and things either, but it's, you meet those people where there's a sort of clinging to things, like, oh, if I just get, I don't know, this surgery, then I'll be okay or something. And it's like, oh, but a minute after the surgery, it could be gone. So it's okay to get the surgery, but all that pain and clinging and, was that necessary? I don't know. And so then the third conclusion of this set of three is, we should practice pure Dharma right now. I think that's when you add them all together. This book says we practice Dharma and only Dharma. It just means what's your priorities, your spiritual priorities. So what do you all think hearing? I mean, have you heard these points before? Is one point more compelling than another point? Does it seem like it would impact your life? That's a lot of different questions, but I just want your input. Let's just talk about it. No one wants to. Everyone's afraid. That's okay.
Can we ask questions about anything you talk
Please.
about? Please.
Yeah, I don't mind. Yeah.
All right. So one thing, I'm really new to studying Buddhist concepts.
Okay.
But one thing that I really struggle with is the concept of the precious human birth. And the idea that animals, a non-human animal is born into like this difficult position. But what makes that difficult is most of the time are humans. We are the ones exploiting and instinct. And so the concept of, and it might just be the word precious, because it seems that it's confluent with other worldviews of, we are the, apex predators, and I have to go hunt, and I have to do this. And it kind of like reinforces that notion. And if we are to be kind, if we're like, one of the things that I like is the idea of possibly extending like ethics beyond my immediate circle or my immediate species, and seeing myself as part of everything. And the idea that my birth is more precious than my cat's birth seems to kind of like be at odds with that. And while I'm really, this is kind of my thinking. It's like, I'm really good at being human, like all these like anger, anxiety, I got my cat is really good at being a cat. Yeah. So isn't part of this being born into this privileged species, shouldn't part of my role be to help her be the best cat that she can be? That in the future she may have a human birth, and I may have taken enough wrong turns that I'm back at the cat level next time. So I just struggle with that, and I don't know how to put that into perspective.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up cat, because I had a big cat incident last night, so which I'll tell you about. So Mm. So the Buddhist worldview would say all beings that are thinking beings or sentient beings, they're all equally important. They're all equally important in the sense that they are capable of, they're all capable of changing their minds and becoming Buddhas in the far future from the Buddhist perspective. So from the Buddhist perspective, all thinking beings have the exact same level of importance because they all have the potential to become Buddhas at some point. However, or having said that, they're not all equal in the sense of where they are in a particular moment. And they are they're different in terms of relative intelligence and capacity for spiritual pursuits. And so when we say, see, that sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? So in the long term, all beings are equal because by nature of having a consciousness, they can become Buddhas from the Buddhist worldview. From the perspective of an immediate moment of a cat, it doesn't have to be a cat, we should pick on dogs. From a dog and a human side by side in a particular moment, the human is considered to have a better rebirth because of their intelligence and capacity in that particular moment to pursue a spiritual path. Do you see the difference? So long term, the dog and the person is equal, and thus should be protected. And so you have a case for why you protect living beings, because they all suffer, they all want happiness, they all have the same long-term potential. But if we're assessing in an immediate moment the relative intelligence of a dog and a human, then the argument is that a human has relatively more intelligence because they're able to pursue spiritual paths. So the example of this, I'll say this because so yesterday I was in a house where a cat brought in a bird, and the bird is under the couch and it's frightened and maybe it's damaged or something. It's hard to tell, and the cat is hunting it. And then there's, then I like go into my sort of more crazy fundamentalist mode, and I'm like trying to save the bird, I'm trying to make the cat go away and all that kind of jazz or whatever. So when we say intelligence, what they kind of mean is that I can't sit the cat down, even if I love and adore the cat, and I can't say, cat, darling, this bird's really afraid. You have cat food, so it's not that you're hungry. If you're trying to offer a gift to me out of affection, I don't really want it. I'd much prefer that you didn't. There's not that kind of intelligence where I can engage with it from a moral perspective, right? It's operating on instinct. It's operating on all kind, probably instinct and its nature and stuff like that. So that's what they mean from being a human is precious, because I can sit down to not to every human being equally, but in general, I can sit down and say, let's think about let's take the perspective of the bird. Like, would you be afraid if you were being gnawed on by, or, let's say I could go to a human person and say, let's take the perspective of the cat. Now, if I told you that you had an abundant bowl of cat food, like, would you be willing to release the bird? And then if I broaden it out more into traditional Buddhism, then I could say, things arise by cause and effect. The quality of your mind arises by cause and effect. Is there damage by practicing privileging your own happiness over the happiness of another being? What's the consequence of practicing that long term, putting your happiness over the happiness of another? What's the benefit of compassion towards a being that's suffering? Can you imagine what that would be like if you worked on that for a long time? I can have that conversation with a human person, right? But I can't have it with an animal person. And so that's what they mean by the relative, one is better or one is more precious. It's precious only in terms of one's capacity to reason, to have moral agency, and to change, and to examine one's actions. And I'm saying some of the same things over in different ways, or whatever. So does that feel like that makes more sense, or am I missing something about your concern? Or
no, that was a really good explanation, and I'm going to think about that, because it's thinking of it in a spiritual context. It definitely makes sense. So yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And to your other point is that the non-human world is so important for Dharma. I mean, in the things have shifted so much since the oldest texts were put into writing. The worldview has changed, or maybe they took things for granted, or who knows, right? But now it's very clear that we need an ecosystem to function. If I want to be happy and to pursue, if I want to be a spiritual person in the way I'm defining it, and I want to pursue happiness and freedom from suffering, and I want to contribute to others' happiness and to remove their suffering, then it's undeniable I need a place to live, to have this body, to have leisure and the environment in which to practice in. And how do I practice Buddhism if there's no water? Or how do I practice Dharma easily if there's no bees and then there's no food? We're one system, right? And so I think it's so important that we protect what we can. Yeah, personally.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Were there any other questions or? Death.
This is just a minor one. When you read the prayer to start out with, there was one word that I can kind of guess at, but I wanted to clarify. I think it was pratya moksha.
Yeah, pratya moksha.
Yep. Moksha, I think, means liberation, as far as I know. What does that whole word mean? Thanks.
I don't know if I know the whole etymology, but you're right. Moksha does mean liberation. Those are the sets of vows that contribute to the attainment of nirvana from a Buddhist perspective. So this includes definitely the various levels of vows for monks and nuns, but also would include lay vows as well. So so in the context of karma, we're trying to do good things and avoid bad things. That we might take we might use Buddhist sources in order to understand what that might include. And then we may take vows offered by the Buddha that the Buddha said, oh, you should definitely do these ones. Because my experience, my meditative experience, and the Buddhist special knowledge is that these vows are good for people. They're sort of, I don't know if they're the minimum that you need, but they're helpful to people. And so the vows include like no killing, no stealing. These are lay vows: no killing, no stealing, no misusing your sexuality, no lying, stealing. What am I missing? Killing, lying, stealing, sexual misconduct, and intoxicants. Usually thought of as alcohol, but perhaps lots of different ways we intoxicate ourselves. So that's also part of those pratimoksha vows as well. Is that helpful? Or I don't know the etymology of.
Okay, so it's just referring to those various vows. That's
those vows. Yeah, in that context, that's what it's referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were there any comments or questions or disagreements? Or you don't have to agree with everything. I'm just presenting possibilities.
I have another question. The kind of, when you talk about finding the teacher, leading up to that, what is that? I mean, like, do you have to be extremely serious and say, I want to take these lay vows, and so now I need to find a teacher, or I would just like to know more, I need to find a teacher, and then how do you go, about that? Do you contact a center and say, I'm looking for a teacher? Like, what are the... Okay.
Sure. I could only give you a rough sketch in the time I have. You can think of teachers in various levels. So some people are just going to be providing information, or they're going to be like professors at a university, or they're going to lead Saturday meditation, and they're going to expose you to some concepts, but you personally don't feel that much of a connection, or maybe their knowledge is limited or something like that. When in the prayer, the foundation of good qualities, when they say guru, he's specifically referring to your spiritual teacher, in the sense of they're the teacher, you're the student, you're the disciple, they're the student. And so Lama Tsongkhapa in Lamrim Chenmo, which is his commentary on Lamrim, that's the largest commentary. There's a whole chapter that you can find, not that long of a chapter, and it essentially maps out the relationship you should have with a teacher. And he's basically trying to accomplish a few things. One is to find a teacher who actually has spiritual qualities that are extraordinary. In a perfect world, you'd find a teacher like that. In the Buddhist milieu, or the Buddhist context, someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the kinds of stories and experiences that students have with them are they're extraordinary experiences. They're not normal experiences. That's the kind of Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, in a perfect world, you find a teacher like that, who has special qualities, they have special knowledge, they have meditative focus, they have special patience, special generosity, special wisdom, someone who's actually special, not just any random person online or whatever. Yeah. Now the process, and when you find someone who's a candidate, then you check them thoroughly. Check. Scrutinize, ask them questions about what they know, check out their students, check out who they hang out with, check out what their peers say about them. Do not join a place where power is going to be, to the best of your ability. Do not join a creepy cult feeling like place. That's very clear. I mean, Lama Tsongkhapa is not going to say it with the same bluntness, but I think that's kind of what he's getting at, is maintain your discernment, know right from wrong, trust your gut. If teachers are doing things that are contrary to basic Buddhist ethics, then be very weary and very hesitant. Don't, check that basically, even if it takes years. Better to take years and get in a good relationship. Once you have that relationship, then you nurture it through your actions and your thoughts. So you see the best in their qualities. You learn to be like, well, okay, they pick their teeth with toothpick in public, which is kind of gross, but they do know something about meditation. Or, they vote for this political party and I vote for this political party, but they do know something about compassion. So you don't get derailed by small imperfections that you see. And most importantly, you protect your relationship to the Dharma in general. That their imperfections don't cause you to like, I don't even want to practice Buddhism anymore because that teacher doesn't like pets or whatever, right? Or they eat meat or something like that. Then you also nurture that relationship with action. That's when you'll see people doing offerings and they offer service, but most importantly, they follow the teachings. So if your teacher says, I want you to meditate on how all beings have been kind to you directly and indirectly, because that's what leads to a universal sense of compassion and love, then you're like, okay, I'm going to try that. I'm not going to just fight against it because don't like being told what to do or something along those lines. So that's the most important way of nurturing it, through action. When it comes to the actual finding of a teacher, I think it happens in various ways. I think this is where things start to get much more personal and a little more inexplicable. So it's finding a teacher that speaks to you in a certain way, that awakens where you feel like they bring out something special in you, maybe some intuitive sense of like, oh, this feels like me, this is like my path. They explain it in a way where it's like, oh gosh, I get it in a special way. I get it, and I can change, They impact you, they have an influence on you that feels different from just another, person who's learning with you or something. And that experience is very special and different. And I've heard many different stories. I've heard some stories where, people meet a teacher for a first time and they cry spontaneously because they're just so moved and they can't explain why, and they've never met the person before. Some people just watch their teacher for years and one day it feels right, or one day they might receive a teaching from a teacher and they're like, oh gosh, like I think they're my teacher, like I trust this person. Or sometimes people just go to check out a teacher and they see something that just touches their heart, like the way Lama Zopa Rinpoche interacts with animals, for example, is very tender, very special. So it's personal, and the general wisdom, and this is a bit kind of like a little bit folksy, if you will, is if you're open and you want it, you just do your prayers, you wait, you take the opportunities that are offered to you, and you assess for yourself if it feels right. And they sort of just trust the process, if you will, that if you're ready, things appear, they ripen, is more jargony term, but things ripen, they just appear. So yeah, I don't know. I know that's not very. I don't know if that's very helpful.
No, that's very helpful.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for that. Because I haven't heard
Yeah.
anything about that. I just hear about finding a teacher, and I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I really appreciate the
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
expounding on that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Yeah, I'll reiterate it a million times because I've done so many guru devotion courses at this point, is to not give up your own capacity for discernment. Do not get bamboozled by people. Do not enter creepy relationships. Protect yourself, while at the same time being open enough to to expand your heart, to soften, to learn a skill you've never, it's a delicate balance. But I'm really, just because of what's happening in spiritual communities, Buddhist communities, non-Buddhist communities, about teachers misusing their power and stuff. It's just so important that we're very upfront about that, I think. And it's just, do not give up your ability to discern whether you feel safe or not. And I tell that to everyone because it's like, I don't want anyone to, we're not, yeah, anyway, I don't want to, anyway. Okay, so we'll end here, but here's how we'll do it. So all the positive potential, all the positive actions that we've engaged in. So something that's positive is defined as something that will ripen as happiness in the future. Something that's negative is something that will ripen as suffering in the future. So all the positive and actions that we've engaged in, things that will ripen as happiness in the future, some kind of happiness in the future, then we dedicate them, we give them a spin, we give them a direction, so that we could always draw from that energy, if you will, until we've achieved our ultimate goal. So we dedicate, give spin. So how do we do that? So we think all the positive merits, we came here, we did the course, we paid attention, we asked questions, we thought about, or these kinds of things. Then I dedicate that so that all spiritual teachers have long and healthy lives, that everyone's able to find a spiritual teacher, that when you find a spiritual teacher, you're able to see the best in their qualities from your own side, so that their imperfections don't derail your overall spiritual project, that you're able to serve them to the best of your ability, and dedicate that we're able to study and practice the lamrim, the small scope, medium scope, great scope. So in preparation to practice Tantra at some point, which we don't have to worry about right now. And dedicate that all the kind of gross sufferings of this world instantly cease, all the wars, poverty, different way that beings suffer, get eaten, and different forms of oppression and all these kinds of things, all those things cease. And dedicate that spiritual institutions get all the resources they need so that people can practice spiritual paths. We dedicate for the well-being of the earth so that beings can practice spiritual paths. So as long as there's a healthy earth, then we have the conditions to practice spiritual paths. And then dedicate to all the people that have begun the process of dying or about to die. So may they transition smoothly. Well, may they become well. And if they can't become well, then may they transition smoothly. And then at the very least, no matter what happens, whether they become Buddhist or not, then may we have a kind heart, warm heart, dedicated to helping others, dedicated to alleviating the suffering to the best of our ability. Okay. Okay. Okay, I will see you next week. Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay.